Hello, my name is Taylor Connard,
And my name is Destiny Vance.
and this is our presentation on the book Affirmative Classroom Management by Richard L. Kirwan.
First, we're going to discuss some of the current debates that are in today's culture that are also related to what we read in Kirwan's book. The first is the use and misuse of 21st century technology in the classroom. In Anita Charles' article, Cell Phones, Rule Setting, Rule Breaking, and Relationship in Classrooms, she discusses the implications of technology. She covers how, though technology is useful and vital in teaching nowadays, it can also be posed as a threat to students in that it distracts them from their learning and when they're pulling out their phone to text other students or participate in social media. The next is popular in many of today's classrooms, and I even witnessed it when I did my observations for the semester, and that teachers are turning to their students when creating rules and punishments. In Rules and Everyday School Life, Teacher Strategies Undermine Pupil Participation, Robert Thornburg discusses how students are more prone to follow these rules when they have a say in the development of the rules and the consequences that follow those rules. The last current debate we will discuss is creating rules that are fair. Fair is never equal. Fair is meeting individual needs. In The Importance of Rule Fairness, the Influence of School Bonds on At-Risk Students in an Alternative School, Janice Free explains why all rules must be fair and balanced and reach all students and not just a small group of them.
Okay, now getting back to Richard Kirwan's book, what is affirmative classroom management? In this book, he discusses what are rules, what are expectations, how do you develop rules, how do you develop consequences, what are punishments, and how does this all connect together for your future classroom? The first thing we're going to discuss is rules. The best way to get your students to follow rules is to link them to values such as respect, honesty, and hard work. When linking these rules together, it helps to think of an act of rule breaking and link it to a value. Imagine if you have a student who cheats. Well, they are breaking the value of honesty and even arguably hard work. Kirwan also discusses that there are 5 critical categories that must be followed regarding rules. The first is academic, which are rules and expectations that relate to learning, such as homework, class participation, cheating, and interruptions. The next one is social, rules and expectations that are related to the student and other students' behavior, such as put-downs, technology, and fighting. The third is procedural. These rules and expectations include being on time, lining up, and following the dress code. The fourth one is cultural. These rules and expectations are about the way we treat others of different backgrounds, such as religion, race, and sexual orientation. The final one is personal. These rules and expectations involve the way other students interact, such as sharing personal things, discussions, and one's own values. Remember, the good rules are related to important values, easy to remember, precise, and focus on positivity versus negativity. Okay, so next we're going to talk about expectations. Expectations differ from rules in that they aren't important enough to be rules, but they still mean something in the classroom. Although expectations aren't enforceable, students need to be aware that there are some exceptions to that. For example, if a student knows of another student that is in danger, they need to let an adult know. Another example is if they know of a student going to harm another student, they need to alert someone. When it comes to safety, these are expectations that must be enforced. So now you have your rules, but how do you develop them? You need to first ask questions such as, what do you think the classroom should be like, and what will help you feel safe and help you learn? Be sure that your students know the difference between rules and expectations. Also, try to include a rule from each of the 5 critical categories listed. It's important to include your students in the rule-making process. Have the students come up with a rule for you, the teacher, but be sure to explain that it cannot go against your values. For example, if the student can't eat or drink in the classroom, neither can the teacher. Also, if you expect the students to be on time, then you too are expected to be on time. And lastly, involve the parents in creating rules. By giving the parents a sense of empowerment, they feel like they're involved in their child's learning. Also, by being sure that the parents in the community are aware of the rules, that can also protect the school from lawyers and any other problems that may occur. And now we're going to talk about consequences. When students' behaviors require a response, there are 2 fundamental choices from which to draw that response: consequences and punishments. Consequences are what we do to ourselves and are a result from our own actions. For something to be a consequence, it has to be related to the rule. It does not humiliate students or attack their dignity. It has behavior change rather than deterrence as its main focus. It offers choices to students. It focuses on the future, not the past. It tends to motivate students to learn, or at least doesn't reduce their motivation. It is implemented privately whenever possible. It increases responsible choices and decreases dependence. In order to develop the best consequences, they must be altruistic. The student has to do something positive for someone else, typically but not exclusively for the person or people affected or hurt. Helping others has two positive outcomes. First, the child learns that hurting others is wrong and needs to be made right. And second, the child may experience a healing effect that helps solve the core problem. Sometimes when you help someone and you get a sense of, accomplishment, it'll kind of deter you from wanting to repeat that. Secondly, consequences must teach. These are related to teaching the how instead of the what of a behavior. Teaching consequences are useful when the reason for the misbehavior is lack of skill in doing things the right way. For instance, if a child, doesn't know that they need to pick up their blocks and walk them to the cabinet and instead they just leave them there and throw them, then how can you blame them for that? You must teach them that consequence isn't acceptable. Next, consequences must transform punishments. Some school punishments, like referrals or detention, can be modified into consequences that are far more effective and productive. Often you have students who are suspended every month for something they've done wrong and they just keep doing it. So instead, make it a consequence. Take something away from them or, give them an alternative to doing that and maybe the suspensions will stop. Next, consequences must inspire. Sometimes consequences will inspire students to achieve. For instance, if you don't pass the test, I'm taking away your talk time or your cell phone time. That will inspire them to achieve so they can be on their cell phones if that's a rule that you have. Next, consequences must plan. These are consequences that help students plan a new response to resolve a problem. Consequences must be logical. These consequences are directly connected to a specific rule violation and phrased in the form of a choice. Most but not all students accept these kinds of consequences because they make logical sense. And lastly, consequences that involve the parents. These consequences create a team between home and school to help a child change the behavior. If a child isn't expected at home to behave, how are they expected to behave in the classroom? Okay, so now we're going to talk about punishments. If consequences are what we do to ourselves, then punishments are the complete opposite. It's what others do to us. Punishments are defined by it hurts the student in some way. It has no relation to the rule. It typically humiliates the student, especially when it is performed in public. It is derived from a threat and deters future negative behavior out of fear. It does not offer a true choice for students. It focuses what has happened, not what will happen in the future. It may hinder motivation to learn. It may hinder the development of responsibility and increase obedience. Punishment is seen as a deterrent. When a student is punished, the idea is that the pain will not only stop that student from repeating the negative behavior, but also prevent others from engaging in the negative behavior themselves. If someone sees that if you fight, you're going to get suspended, then another student may say, I don't want to get suspended, so then they won't, end up fighting. So a big question is, how do you know when to use consequences versus punishments? A punishment is preferable when its advantages outweigh its negatives. When deciding whether to use a punishment or a consequence, ask yourself 5 questions. How much time do you have before taking an action to stop a misbehavior? Is sacrificing a child's motivation to learn worth it if punishing him helps all the other children? Does the student have special needs and only respond to punishment? What is the long-term outcome of the teacher's choice? Will the intervention teach the child how to change rather than simply what to change? Okay, so now we want to make sense of this all. And here are the final steps when you're doing your own affirmative classroom management. First, make a list of values and rules, following your list of possible consequences and your rare but necessary to include punishments. List your values, rules, and consequences together as a unit. Match the consequences directly to the rule. And lastly, it's important to know that fair is never equal. Fair is meeting individual needs. One thing might not work for another student. You may have a student who doesn't respond to punishment, but instead needs to respond to consequences. And often some students, they don't understand the rules that you're enforcing or the reason behind it. I think it's extremely important to back up anything you say or do so your students know that there is a reason behind this. It is a tested and finalized way to do things.
Okay, so now that we know how to develop rules and how to develop consequences and punishments, why is this useful to teachers? So I looked up some classroom implications to why this is important to teachers, and include helping a teacher to not only develop effective rules and consequences in her classroom, but also in getting together with the rest of the faculty in the school to develop effective rules and consequences throughout the school so that the students will remain safe and obedient to the rules. The book also suggests that students have a say in what rules are created and implemented in the classroom. I found this useful because students are more prone to follow the rules when they have a say in creating them. And again, like I mentioned before, I noticed this when I observed the classroom that I did, and that the teacher, all the rules that she had enforced were helped developed by the students in the classroom, and they seemed to follow those rules much better than any other classroom that I observed because they had a say in those rules, so they understood the rules better. The book also gives helpful advice on effectively enforcing the rules and consequences. The big advice that it gave was to be consistent. Be consistent with the rules that you enforce and be consistent with the consequences that you enforce. Likewise, this book explains why expectations are more important than rules. This is because expectations, though they cannot be enforced and usually aren't enforced, usually deal with safety precautions and things that are safe for students. Rules are more for one's convenience and are enforced because they have consequences that follow, as expectations do not have consequences. We highly recommend this book to all teachers in every grade and every school. I feel like every teacher would benefit from reading this book about how to effectively develop and enforce good rules and consequences in the classroom. We found Richard L. Kerwin's book to be highly informative and very helpful when it comes to figuring out how to control our own classrooms in the future.
I think often when you're learning how to be a teacher, you don't get the tools to understand the classroom and how it's going to work and how students have different needs. And this book really addresses, how these rules, how to develop them and how to alter them if you need be. And it is a really useful book.
And like Taylor just said, through all of our education classes that we have taken or we will take, you read the textbook and it doesn't really tell you how to enforce these rules. It just tells you you need to have control of your classroom and other such things, but it doesn't tell you how to do this or how to develop good rules. And that's what I really liked about this book, is that it takes you step by step how to develop these rules and what consequences to have with these rules, and that you need to incorporate your own values and morals into your rules, because if it's important to you, it should also be important to your students.
And also, playing off what Destiny just said, this book really, it does go step by step in how to do things, and even if that way doesn't work, how to go about it a different way. And I like how it emphasizes, that point that every child has individual needs, and we learn that so much in our classrooms, that each child needs a tailored approach for them, because it's not always going to work. And I think, this book really does a good job of making you see that. And one thing I never realized is just how big a difference there is between consequences and punishments, because, when you're in high school, they kind of go hand in hand, it seems, but we really learn that it is a totally different approach. So we definitely enjoyed this book, and I think that every teacher candidate and potential educator needs to read it.
I agree, Taylor. And what you were saying about high school and you don't really see the difference between punishments and consequences, it's like I see it more in middle schools and elementary schools, because there's a big difference. There's a big difference between sending a note home with a parent than there is actually meeting with that parent or sending that student to the corner to sit for an hour or however long. But like you also said, I feel like every teacher in every school in every state in every country would benefit from reading this book, because when you go to be a teacher or when you're thrown out into observation fields and stuff, you're not equipped with this kind of stuff. You learn as you go. And I feel like this book is a manual, so to say, for a teacher to really depend on and learn from, because it's so informative, and it's been really helpful to read this book.
Okay, and that concludes our presentation. Thank you so much for your time.